Hey everyone, welcome to our Blender Beginner series. So this whole series is broken up into 6 different chapters. So in chapter 1, we'll look at how to do all the modeling, so taking basic primitive shapes inside Blender and creating more complex 3D assets. And then chapter 2, we'll have a look at how to UV unwrap all of our models so that we can take it into texturing, which we'll cover in chapter 3. Then chapter 4, we'll look at our lighting and our cameras before we start looking at some surface imperfections. And then finally, we'll do rendering and compositing. So there are some resources that you need to download to be able to follow along. So if you click the link in the description of the video, you will find all the reference images we use to actually model everything. There's also a file of all the custom decals I've created that you can use inside the scene, and there's also an ebook that talks through the whole process as well, so you can either follow along to the videos or you can follow along to the ebook as well. It covers the same things. If you've got any questions about anything as you're going through it, leave a comment in the video that you're struggling with, and I'll get back to you. Hi everyone, welcome back to part 23 of our Blender Beginner series. So we've got our scene set up, we've got our camera set up, we've now done our lighting and the base part of our material. So all that's left now to do is sort of like just take those materials a little bit further, add some imperfections, make it look a little bit more realistic. So there's a couple of ways we're going to do that. So what we're going to do is there is this resource here, so resourceboy.com. I'll share the link. Where there's loads of free grunge textures you can use. So I'm going to show you how to apply your own ones manually inside the shader editor. I also do use this add-on here called One Click Aid, which is $18 from Superhive, which I fully recommend getting. So I'll show you on a couple of materials, or a couple of the models, how to apply it all, and then what I'll do is I'll speed up me doing it because it'll be the same thing, rinse and repeat for everything. So it's worth pointing out that for some of the things we're going to do, they won't be visible until you, 1, are in cycles, and 2, are in render view mode as well. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is drag over, so we've got our shader editor. So I've got my helmet here. So what we want to do, if we're going to start adding in our own imperfections manually. So we've talked a bit about the principle of the SDF and the fact that you got your base color, which is what gives it the color. Metallicness gives it that metallic look of how shiny it's going to be. Roughness is to like it's matte or glossy, and normal is what makes things look more or less 3D based on shadows rather than making it actually 3D. Okay, and because we're doing texture based for PBR materials, they're all based off these images that we've got here. So these are very, very easy to edit. So we've talked about adding things like color ramps to change the colors and that sort of thing. So we're happy with the base material. Now it's just how do we add some imperfections. Now the materials we've picked have actually already got a little bit of imperfections and like variation on it already. So what we're going to do is in our shader editor, Shift A to add. I'm going to go to IM, type in image texture, click on open, and I'm going to go to my downloads where I've got this file of all these grunge textures. Okay, so find whichever one you quite like the look of. Completely up to you what you want to go with. So if I go with something like that, just for example. So what we want to do is apply it to our color to mess with the color a little bit. So we're going to Shift A and type in mix, and we want a mix color like that. And what we're going to do is take the original color and put that to the top into A. And then we're going to go Shift A, add hue saturation value, because we're going to take that same base color and plug it into the hue saturation. And then we're going to take that and plug it into B. So it's going to mix it into there. Then into the factor, here, we're going to put our grunge map, whatever that is. Take that color and plug that into there. Okay, now nothing's happening yet because we need to put the result, it needs to go into the base color. And here, so you can see what's going to happen. The value set to 1. If you put something more extreme, put like 10, you can see here, you start to see some of these imperfections and things appearing. Now 10's quite an extreme number. You want it to be relatively subtle. But if I show you to 1, and then I put, you see it more, you see what's going on. And obviously if you choose a different grunge map, something that's got a bit more grunge to it, like that one, you see what's going on. We've got this effect here. Something like that. So we got that variation. That's the first thing we do, and we do the same thing to all different materials like that. The other thing I always do to materials is I add what's called ambient occlusion. Now ambient occlusion essentially will add shadows where things would naturally cast shadows to each other. So things where there's overlaps or dips. So things like along all this trim where it meets the main body of the helmet, you'd expect to see little bits of shadows and grunge along there. So it's very easy to add that. So what we do is again, come to the shader editor. I'm going to Shift A and type in AM and get to ambient occlusion. Shift A, I'm going to add a color ramp like that. And then Shift A, I'm going to add another mix shader node like that. So what we want to do is take the ambient occlusion node, take the color, put that into the factor of the color ramp, take the color and put that into, so we don't want mix shader, sorry, we want mix color. Mix color. That's going to go into the bottom one, and then we're going to take our material, put that into the top like that, and then put the result into our base color. So you see it's messed up our material a little bit. What we want to do is with our color ramp, you swap black and white around, so drag that over like that and drag that across. Now if I were to drag this across, you can see what's going on here is where we've got things overlapping and touching each other, you see this shading starts to appear. Okay, now you want it to be quite subtle, so you don't want something extreme like that. Okay, so what you can do is take the white and make that a little bit less obviously white, a little bit off grey slightly, and drag the black in a little bit as well. Something like that. And the more you drag that in, it makes it bigger or smaller. So you see here we're starting to get these effects. That's probably a little bit too much if you come in and have a look at how it's looking. So you see, yeah, along the base here it looks a little bit too much. So turn that into a render view like that. So you see it's coming along all these little bits here. So let's bring that over, bring that down, something like that. So that's the end of doing things manually. Now this is where the fun of using one-click age comes in. So if you have that selected, I'm going to press N to get up my menu because we've got one-click age installed as an add-on. If you haven't got that installed and you've downloaded it, edit preferences, come to add-ons, click on this button here and install from disk, and then make sure you've got it downloaded. So if you click on the material and the body you want to affect, go to add OCA setup, and you'll see here in the shader editor is added a one-click age node. Now you don't need to worry what goes on behind there, but if you click on it and press tab, you'll get under all the different parts of it. But what we're going to start to do is start to add some of these effects in here. So you can add things now. Edgeware will not appear until, as I say, you are in cycles, but you can add things like grunge. Now it does take a little bit of time to load, so be cautious of that. You can also play around with things like dust. And again, very subtly start to see a little bit of effects on your thing. If you can't see what's going on, if you turn up the age of it so you can really see the effects, so you can even turn the opacity so you see the effects it's happening. Obviously that's too extreme, so we'll take that down a little bit. We don't want anywhere near that much. And there's loads of different variations, different kinds of dust that you can play around with, like that. Grunge is normally a pretty good one to play around with. So you can see the effects that's having on here. So if I drag that across, that's with nothing, and that's, we're starting to add some variation to our helmet as well. There is also things like wood damage, stains, that sort of thing. Let's add a little bit of edgeware. And remember what I said, you won't see edgeware until you come into render view. Again, that adds a little bit more, like with our ambient occlusion, adds a little bit of like grime and stuff on the edges of our material, like that. So you can then, of course, come in and change the color of that because we don't want it to be too like obvious and in our face. So bring that down a little bit, something like that. Going to our grunge, like that. So that's the basis of our like making our materials look a bit more realistic and a bit more worn. Now I'm going to show you with one more model. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my camera off because it'll start to lag when I'm starting to add all these things onto my material. And then I'll just speed up the whole process. So I'll just like do it like double or triple speed depending on what it is. So let's take like our table, for example. So again, we'll do the same sort of thing. So this is our material, our shader editor for our table. So what we're going to do, let's go Shift A, and we're going to add image texture and add that there. We'll find whichever grunge texture we want. It's my download, sorry. So let's grab something like that. I'm going to Shift A, add a mix color node, not shade node like I did before. I'm going to take the output of the current material, put that into the one at the top, Shift A and add another hue saturation node. I'm going to put it through there like that so that we can play around with the values and put the color into the factor like that. And you can see, as I say, sometimes it's a bit hard to see when the light's not directly on it, but we can always put that value up really, really high and see what's going on. Yeah, do like 20 and you see you've got this variation of our material. Always find if you can't really see what's going on, crank the number up really, really high first, because then you can always dial it back a little bit afterwards as well, which works quite well. See how that looks? Yeah, and you see you got a little bit of those variations on our material. So that's the first step. Then remember, Shift A, I'm going to add ambient occlusion to get those shadows in. Shift A, add a mix color node, and Shift A and add a color ramp. So take the color, so the ambient occlusion of that node into the factor, put that color into the bottom, put the final output of that color into A, drag this across, and then we'll take that result and put it into our base color there. Now remember, we need to make sure, because it's messed that up, swap the black and white over like that. And you see here, it's casting shadows where there's things on the table as well, which is really what we're after. Okay, we'll drag that over, bring that, dial that in a little bit. Now here it's quite light here, so let's change the color of that to a little bit more of a grey again. So you're always going to do, it's going to be black and white or some variation of black and white, so you go into your greys and stuff like that. But all it's doing is where you would see stuff sitting on the table, you'd expect to see a little bit of build-up of grunge and dirt and that sort of thing. Okay, so let's see how it's all looking. Okay, and then the last thing to do with that is let's grab this, and it's worth pointing out, by the way, this will affect anything where the materials are linked together. So the fact that actually this table, the legs and base have all got the same material linked, it will do the same to all of those because they're linked together. It's only if you then created a duplicate of it where it won't affect that. So then let's grab that, hit N, one-click age, and add that. And this is where I kind of want there to be some like paint, because obviously we're doing spray paint, so I want it to look a bit messy. So let's try things like dirt. Like that. I'm going to bring that up, but let's change the color of that to some paint there. Maybe dirt's the wrong one to go with there. I'll tell you what, let's do like a smear. Yeah, something like that. I'm going to bring that in a little bit. Maybe we change the color of that. Bring it down a little bit. It's got this stain, so let's take these stains and let's turn that into like paint color a little bit, so it looks like we sort of like spray painted bits on by accident, like that. Let's see how it's all starting to look. And then we can always add more than one of the same thing. So we've got stains, let's add another stains, and we can change that to like a stains 3. And what other paints, we'll change that to like a blue paint maybe. And you can also use this here to sort out the location of it all. So maybe what we want to do is X, Y, so going along X, let's just move that across. Something like that. So you see we're starting to get this effect of having paint and things on our table as well. And then jump back into render view just to see how it looks. So you just want it subtly, you don't want loads and loads. But that's pretty much the extent of adding these imperfections. So what I'm going to do is I'll stop narrating what I'm doing now, and I'll just like do a time lapse of me adding this to all those materials. Okay.